afternoon. My name is Holly Thompson from Griffith University, and I will be giving a presentation which will focus on the Oxfam Haiti crisis that was uncovered in 2018. I will first provide some background on the crisis, then I will speak about the typology of this particular crisis and the type of responses that Oxfam made. Finally, I will speak to the damage that Oxfam's particular choice of response caused and how it possibly could have been prevented. On the 9th of February 2018, the Times newspaper published an article with the headline, "Top Oxfam Staff Paid Haiti Survivors for Sex." The article alleged that following the devastating earthquake in Haiti in 2010, Oxfam sent staff to Haiti to assist, and allegations were made of several staff hiring sex workers for prostitution, some of whom are alleged to have been underage. Immediately following the article being published, Oxfam released a statement on the 9th of February dismissing the allegation of a cover-up, stating that the behaviour of the staff in question was, quote, "totally unacceptable, contrary to our values and the high standards we expect of our staff." Oxfam stated that 4 staff members were dismissed and 3 had resigned as a result of the allegations and subsequent internal investigation in 2011. Oxfam's press release also stated that the regulatory body Charity Commission for England and Wales had confirmed that it had no regulatory concerns with Oxfam following the actions taken by the organisation into the allegations. Following this press release, Oxfam was ordered to hand over all information from the internal investigation to the Charity Commission. The following day, the Charity Commission released a statement stating that they had not been given all of the information into the minutiae of the allegations and that Oxfam had simply recorded the allegations as, quote, "serious misconduct," with no mention of underage sex workers. The Commission requested all information be given regarding the allegations as part of an ongoing case. Over the next few days, Oxfam lost several ambassadors and patrons, the Deputy Chief Executive resigned, and Haiti began to demand prosecution of those aid workers that had hired sex workers in the country. There were several contrasting statements made by the heads of Oxfam, with the Oxfam Great Britain Chief Executive, Mark Goldring, stating that the attacks on the charity were, quote, "out of proportion to the level of culpability." Meanwhile, the head of Oxfam International stated that the accusations and what had happened in Haiti would plague the organisation for years. On the 17th of February, the charity published a full-page apology in The Guardian before finally publishing their 2011 internal inquiry into the alleged abuse in Haiti, which showed that several of the staff members that were under investigation had physically threatened a staff member that threatened to blow the whistle. The charity lost thousands of donors. Mark Goldring stood down from his position. Further sexual assault allegations were uncovered through investigations, and subsequently, Oxfam was banned from entering and working in Haiti again. This type of crisis is one that McDonald and Hartel define as internal and controllable. The original Haiti crisis arose out of the actions of Oxfam's internal staff, being a direct result of their choices. An individual's choices and subsequent actions are entirely controllable, and as they were under the employ of Oxfam and representing Oxfam in Haiti, the individual's actions are a reflection of the organisation. The subsequent lack of response from Oxfam and the alleged cover-up that ensued began to form its own crisis, which was also controllable and internal, as the organisation chose not to be forthcoming with a statement and opted for a quiet internal investigation. According to Professor Tim Coombs' master list of crises categories, the Oxfam crisis is one of organisational misdeed. The staff at Oxfam were aware of their actions and potential fallout to the organisation if discovered, which is evident in the threatening of a would-be whistleblower by those under investigation, which included senior staff of Oxfam. The original crisis was entirely preventable if the organisation had reiterated its expectations to all staff and enforced strict guidelines for behaviour while on missions for the organisation. The subsequent crisis, after being called out by the Times for the cover-up, was entirely preventable if the organisation had been immediately publicly upfront about the allegations and the subsequent internal investigation and dismissal of staff. Instead, they opted for silence. This brings us to Oxfam's response. When the initial allegations in Haiti were brought against Oxfam staff, Oxfam opted to take an approach of silence. The organisation did not communicate at all with the public about the initial allegations and internal investigation. This meant that by the time the Times posted their article about the cover-up in 2018, Oxfam was put into a position of either confessing, justifying, or denying the allegation that they covered up the misdeeds. Unfortunately, Oxfam chose to deny the cover-up. While they did not deny the original crisis of their employees paying for sex workers, they chose to engage in justification, saying that it was the actions of the individuals and not the organisation itself, deflecting blame onto the staff themselves. They then denied that they covered it up, and they denied that there were founded allegations of the utilisation of underage sex workers. Once the Times article was released claiming that Oxfam covered up the misdeeds and the Charity Commission requested all information on the investigation and allegations, only then did Oxfam release the full results of their inquiry. This lacked information about the specifics of the allegation and only referred to them as, quote, serious misconduct, stating that the allegations of underage sex workers was unproven. After being hit with multiple more allegations of workers paying sex workers on other missions, the chief executive chose to resign. Multiple investigations were launched into Oxfam's handling of the crisis. Thousands of donors were lost, including celebrities and notables such as Archbishop Desmond Tutu. Oxfam admitted culpability and announced they were launching practices to carefully vet their recruits and stop dishonest references. Finally, Oxfam published a full-page apology in The Guardian. According to Professor Tim Coombs, the greater the threat to the organisation that the crisis poses, the more the response needs to show how much responsibility the organisation is taking. For Oxfam, this threat was enormous. It had a snowball effect that lasted nearly a decade. The choice by Oxfam to adopt the posture of denial meant that by the time all cards were on the table, all information had been presented, and every aspect of the allegations was visible, the rebuilding posture that Oxfam eventually had to be significant and clearly visible. People attributed blame to the organisation, as the crisis was internal and controllable, which is the most damaging type of crisis. By the time the apology was published, allegations had been made of employees using sex workers in several instances overseas, where Oxfam workers were supposed to be assisting during times of crisis. This completely depleted Oxfam's credibility in all the work that they did. The negative image of Oxfam had far outweighed any good the organisation had done to thousands of donors, including government donors, and Oxfam lost an estimated £34 million in government and donor funding. The fallout from Oxfam's crisis was enormous. Stakeholders now perceived a risk associated with Oxfam. Oxfam's credibility was diminished, and the public had lost faith in Oxfam to do the right thing immediately when presented with a crisis. According to risk communications consultant Peter Sandman, risk equals hazard plus outrage. In other words, the risk of a crisis is the presence of a hazard that has the potential to cause damage to an organisation, coupled with the intensity of the outrage felt by the stakeholders should this hazard occur. Sandman also states that the community assesses risk in a moral-emotional way rather than technical. Thus, with the uncovering of Oxfam's employees engaging in inappropriate behaviour multiple times, the hazard of this behaviour being repeated is intensified in the minds of stakeholders. Subsequently, Sandman talks about outrage intensifiers, including that the crisis is man-made rather than natural, causes damage, and presents a danger to children. This means that the outrage felt by the stakeholders is great, leading to a perceived higher risk for an organisation of a further crisis. Unfortunately, by the time Oxfam adopted the confession approach to the crisis, the damage had already been done to their reputation. Stakeholders were angry and unforgiving, they had lost an extraordinary amount of funding and were banned from entering Haiti again. There are several avenues Oxfam could have taken to diminish the fallout from the crisis. Had they initially jumped on the front foot and released a statement and details of the internal investigation to the public, the following allegation of the cover-up would not have had a chance to develop into such an enormous crisis. William Benoit of the Public Relations Journal outlined several steps into restoring a brand's image after a reputational crisis. Benoit speaks about the importance of admitting culpability immediately after a crisis. While Oxfam eventually apologised and admitted that the allegations of sexual misconduct were founded, their initial denial of a cover-up did not bolster the company's image. Benoit also speaks about shifting the blame, which Oxfam as a company initially did by diffusing their responsibility and shifting the blame onto the individuals at fault. However, once Oxfam released their full apology and statement, this was better received by stakeholders. A further step for image restoration, according to Benoit, is to publicly report plans to correct and prevent a similar crisis from occurring. Once the blame has been laid and the reputational damage has been done, it is important to assure the public that the company is taking all possible steps to ensure that these unacceptable organisational misdeeds will not be repeated. Oxfam released a statement on the 11th of June 2019 with the headline, Oxfam Great Britain deeply sorry for sexual exploitation in Haiti and flawed investigation, with the promise that it is implementing recommendations for practice reform going forward. While the statement was effective at admitting blame for both the original crisis of sexual exploitation in Haiti and the flawed internal investigation following, the 8 years between the initial allegations and this statement did not paint Oxfam in a good light. Oxfam Chair's trustees Caroline Thompson responded to the 79 recommendations made by the regulatory body, stating, quote, "We should have acted more decisively to address resourcing concerns raised by our own safeguarding team and been more proactive in our reporting of serious incidents. But I'm confident that Oxfam GB is changing and that the steps we are taking are putting Oxfam on the right path for the future." The Oxfam Haiti crisis is a prime example of a smouldering crisis that could have been extinguished if the company had been forward-thinking and honest with its stakeholders instead of diminishing responsibility. The initial crisis of Oxfam workers employing potentially underage sex workers would have been effectively combated with the dismissal of responsible employees following the internal investigation, which was done. However, by not being forthcoming to its stakeholders about the investigation and not disclosing all appropriate information to the regulatory body, it is entirely understandable that the media viewed this as a cover-up many years later. If Oxfam had immediately disclosed all internal investigation information and admitted fault once the Times article was published, it could have reduced the subsequent anger from stakeholders and reduction in donations. If Oxfam stays true to its word that it is implementing new practices to future-proof itself from any such crises happening again, creating a crisis prevention and preparedness plan, it would be hoped that no such incidents would happen again, but if they did, that Oxfam's reputation and organisation would be able to withstand it. Thank you.